is May 12th, 2008. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Fargo, North Dakota. Can you please tell me your full name?
Larry Kraft. I have no middle name.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Strasburg, North Dakota in 1937, October 10th.
Have you heard any interesting stories about your birth?
Well, only that I was born at home in a trailer house in Strasburg, and that I know very little more about it than that. It obviously worked.
Great. Can you share some of your earliest memories with us?
Earliest memories. My earliest memory is in Strasburg, and I did something I wasn't supposed to do, and my mother paddled me, and I went next door to where my grandmother lived, and told her about it, and my grandmother went over and chewed out my mother, and I was there. That's an early memory. I can still remember looking up at my grandmother and telling her about it. Probably not a smart thing to do. The other early memory is, of getting my arm caught in a washing machine wringer. My mother was washing clothes in her brand new washer with a Briggs & Stratton motor and an automatic release of a device on the wringer that if you hit, it popped open the wringer. And she went out to hang up clothes, and I put my hand up to, I think I tried to wring something for her, tried to help her. I don't know what I was doing, but my hand got caught, and when she came in the door, the wringer had gone all the way up to almost my armpit, and she was able to release it, and my arm stayed where it was supposed to be. I remember then, I don't remember any pain or anything, but I do remember we took a train ride from Strasburg to Linton where the doctor was, and I have that memory. A couple of others, I remember going swimming, and my aunts who lived in the area were taking me swimming. They wouldn't let me go out in the water, and it just infuriated me. I remember that really well because I wanted to go into the water further than they'd let me. But that's just not a lot to remember. I was pretty young in Strasburg. Oh, I do remember one other thing. One of my older cousins came to Christmas time dressed as a Santa Claus and came to our house and scared the tar out of me, and I hid under the bed. And I remember looking out at him, and I wouldn't come out. So that's for what it's worth.
All right. You mentioned your grandmother who lived next door.
That was my grandmother Sanger, my maternal grandmother. She, I don't know what, she was always quite sickly. She was way overweight, had diabetes, and not a pleasant person to most people, but she liked me a lot. In fact, she gave me her family fountain pen, which was it came from Germany. It was red and had a bunch of little shiny things on it, and I had it and promptly lost it by the time I was 7, I suppose. Don't know whatever happened to it, but it was a nice pen. But she was a little bit hard to get along with, and she had no problem at all telling my mother whatever she wanted to tell my mother. And I think it was one of the reasons my parents wanted to leave Strasburg. That's too close, I think.
Did you spend a lot of time with her?
Not that I can remember. I'm sure we had to have certain Sunday dinners and things. We lived right next door, so it was probably too much time for. And I'm sure she helped. It was there that my father. Well, he wouldn't have built the house while we were living there, because that's the house he built. I suppose he built it because it was next door, and they gave him the land. I'm not sure why that is, but that's probably it.
Did you know your mother's father?
Lawrence, I knew about as well. It's we just didn't spend that much time with them other than party atmospheres. I just don't remember. Again, maybe I did. That during that time I was quite young. Later we didn't. After we moved away, but I assume we did at the time. But the memory isn't there.
Were they very religious people?
They were. They were. I'd like to call them blind religious. They just followed the teachings of the Catholic Church, and whatever the Catholic Church and the Pope said was right, and you don't question it. But they did all of the holy days of obligations. They went to Mass all the times that you're supposed to go to Mass, and they followed the dictates of the Church quite closely. I think that was probably pretty standard for the Germans from Russia in that community, the Catholics, which most of them were in that Strasbourg area. They were Catholic.
How many children did your maternal grandparents have?
My maternal grandmother had 8, and I'm trying to. There were how many girls and how many? Three boys and 5 girls.
All right. Can you tell me a little bit about your paternal grandparents?
My paternal grandparents. My paternal grandfather came from Russia later. My maternal grandfather was just a boy of 6 when he came to the United States in 1886. Whereas my paternal grandfather had been drafted into the Russian army, and he got married, and they were going to draft him again. He did his stretch, and he was going to have to go to the service again. And rather than do that, he jumped ship. He left Russia at a time that it was not that easy to leave. This is much later, 1909, 10, in that range. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was pregnant with her first child. That would be Uncle Pete, who was the oldest in the family. There's a mixed story as to when he was born. I always understood that he was born in Canada on the way here from Russia, but I have some other information that suggests otherwise. So some of it's lore and some of it is true. But she ended up having 17 children. One died at about age 2. The rest all survived. My father was the second oldest of the group. There are still some of the daughters are still living, although all the men died. I mean, my uncles and my father, they're all passed away. But very, very healthy woman. She lived well into her 80s, and went to Mass every day. She lived in Strasbourg at an assisted living place, and would go to Mass every day, or I imagine later the mass came to her in that assisted living place. I'm not sure.
Sounds like you had a lot of aunts and uncles.
I had a lot of them. Yes, yes.
Were you close to any of them?
Well, we didn't live close to any of them, so it was hard to be close. But the parents always prided themselves as being a close family, as you might expect it. We attended all of the weddings, and there were many of the siblings and then their kids, and it was always an occasion for a party, which was the Germans from Russia liked to have. They worked hard, but they really did party hard.
Can you tell us about a typical wedding celebration?
Oh, a typical wedding celebration. Of course, the church was involved, and once the church events were taken care of, we're talking about a party that would last, depending on the earlier ones lasted longer than the ones later, but it just involved an awful lot of dancing and merrymaking and food, lots of good food and a lot of kuchen, but mostly just a lot of people having a good time. The thing that was kind of always impressive to me is that these people thought nothing about drinking. I mean, it was just a part of life, but it was also antisocial to have too much to drink. So you rarely saw, I rarely saw people who were beyond the point of just having a good time, and the occasional funny uncle or cousin who went beyond that was just so socially unacceptable that and for example, I mean, we always, my father, I had beer, wine when I was a kid. I mean, not a lot, but I could have a sip, but that's all. It was not like that big a deal, but that was a part of the celebration. They had a thing that they brought from Russia called red eye. Red eye is 190 proof alcohol with some sugar, burnt sugar, water, and red food coloring. And the wedding ceremony, the reception typically started by some guy or guys walking around with bottles of this red eye with a little shot glass, and everybody took a shot. And it was out of the same shot glass, of course. They didn't provide you with 150 shot glasses. But even the kids would have a sip of that at an early age. It was, again, not a big deal. But red eye, that's mean stuff.
So did your family make their own alcohol?
No, not that I'm certain they didn't. My family did not have a lot of alcohol around it. There'd be an occasional event. When the threshing crew came, there'd be some alcohol to serve the threshers before the meal that my mother would make. I think I told you about the Mogan David at the one farm. I won't repeat that.
Is there anything else you remember about wedding?
Well, not specifically. It's just if you want to picture a good old-fashioned dance at a barn or some such place, many typical. Always accordion players, of course. The accordion was big. There'd be the bands always had at least an accordion and then one or two or three other instruments, but always an accordion.
Were the bands local people?
Mostly, yes, yeah, yeah. There wasn't I don't think there was a lot of money spent on these weddings. It wasn't like the current weddings. It's just a lot of homemade food and local. I had a cousin who played at lots and lots of wedding dances. And, I'm sure Lawrence Welk did in his early days.
Do you remember any of the specific foods for weddings?
Homemade sausages, homemade meats of that kind. A lot of noodle dishes. Mostly the kinds of things that we tend to think of now at church suppers, those kinds of things. But I think the unique thing would have been the homemade sausage, which we made sausage every year on the farm. My father butchered and saved every bit of the hog, the blood, and all the parts except the hair. Everything else was used in one way or another. But the sausage, he made blood sausage, he made bratwurst and head cheese and pickled pig's feet and all that good stuff.
Do you remember how to make any of these things?
No, I never did know how. I watched him do it. I'm sure I can make them. I mean, I've got recipes where I could if I wanted to, but it's just mostly grinding up some meat and putting some spices in it. And
did you have specific butchering days?
Well, not specifically, but it was always in the fall, as I recall. And of course, we had no electricity, so we had no refrigeration. So for a few days, we just had a real good time. We did have when we lived in Lemoore, we had a locker in Berlin, and so the meat would get frozen and put there. But before that, Mother would can the meat in glass jars and preserve it that way. But mostly of chicken butchered all year long, and we always had eggs, of course. And we had sheep, but we never had lamb. In my adult life, I don't understand that because it just seems such an odd thing not to have. But I think they were too valuable. But we had sheep and we had pigs and cattle.
And you had to take care of them all.
Oh yeah. It was a real chore, watering especially in the winter, keeping the tank open. I remember my father chopping a lot, and then getting the water out of our well, which was a real chore. The well was so deep that the pumping process involved a long time before you saw the first trickle of water. And that water is what my mother washed clothes with, and she got the water by hauling it. My father and we kids, of course, and my mother would haul water from the well, which was a ways away, to the house, and she washed water in this really hard, impossibly hard water.
Did she make her own soap?
Yes, she made lye soap. Yeah, she sure did.
Do you remember how she made it?
She used the fat from the pigs we slaughtered. That became the main ingredient in the soap, I recall. And that's as far as I know. I know since it was lye soap, it must have had lye in it.
Okay. So, other than taking care of the animals, what were some of the other chores you did at home?
Well, we had there was the harvest was always major, and putting in crops and haying. Those things were, well, it's how the living was made. But the whole family, my mother would go out in the field with my father. We used a binder part of the time and had to stack the binding, and we all did it. And that was early morning to late at night. There was none of this starting at 9 and quitting at 5. It's when the sun came up. You're working. When the sun went down, this one you couldn't see anymore, and it was dangerous. They'd quit. So there was that, and I think that's fairly usual too. I think most farmers know that. I think the hardship came from the lack of resources, the lack of machinery, and it was very difficult. But after World War II, the price of grain just shot up, and in a very few years, the farm finally paid off, and the folks were able to put a little money away. I'm thinking that the time right after World War II must be just a little bit like what we're going into now with the food shortages around the world and the price of grain going up, making it possible for farmers to live again. But that was again right after World War II. Things got really good for a while.
Okay. Did your mother keep a garden?
Yes, yeah, big garden, lots of garden, and we got to work in it, for sure. We didn't have a lawn. We had whatever grass there was in the farmyard. My father took care of with the farm machinery. I don't think we owned a lawnmower, so that wasn't a problem until we got to town. Yeah, she canned just for the whole winter. She had lots and lots of canning. Friday was always baking day. Friday, of course, is with Catholics, you couldn't eat meat. So Friday was the day that we got to have all of those great foods that the Germans developed as substitutes for meat. Probably the best day of the week for food. Good German cooking, and she baked, and that was her Friday. Monday was wash day. Friday was baking day, and every other day was work day, too.
What were some of your favorite things that she baked?
Well, she baked a Fleischkichle. Fleischkichle, that's just, I think every group has a fried dough of some kind. This is fried dough, but not everybody can make it the way it's supposed to be made. Just ask her. She did a real nice job with it, and we'd have that on Fridays very often with bean soup. The two complement each other real well. So we had those on Friday often. In the summer, we often had watermelon and Nipfla. That's a good dough noodle with potatoes and onions, and it's really good. And rivel soup. I'm killing these words, of course. Rivel. She would stand there for ages, taking pieces of dough and doing this with them. And they'd end up being little hard puppies that were great in soup. So we had that. And she had her Dampfnudler with prunes and Kassnudler, that's cheese, cottage cheese, and sauerkraut noodles, plain noodles with the raised dough with everything had potatoes, and a lot of things had cream, of course. So those are my favorites. My sisters are do them really well yet. So when I go visit one of my sisters, we probably will have knifla, which is my favorite.
What was your least favorite food that your mother made?
I don't think I had one. Yeah, I really don't remember anything I didn't like. I think if I had something I didn't like, I probably wouldn't have told anybody. I mean, we're talking about Germans from Russian mothers, and there's no such thing as a picky eater. You're going to eat it. If you take it, you eat it, and you take a little of everything, and you eat it. But in all honesty, I can't think of anything I didn't like, which is, probably why I'm chubby.
Right. Well, did you ever have to help with any of the inside chores, like laundry or dishes?
Well, dishes always, and laundry not. That was strictly something, maybe we would help her hang things, but I was never tall enough to reach the line. And then in the winter, of course, the sheets and everything would get so frozen that it would take an adult to bring them in. But our house, I think I mentioned that it had no electricity, it had no running water, and it had no central heating system. There was a stove, a coal stove that sat in the middle of the living room, and there were vents in the ceilings. That's how the upstairs was supposed to get heated, but it really didn't work very well. And that stove, it's where my father would pop popcorn in the winter, and we sat around it a lot because it was warm there. And the Germans from Russia like sunflower seeds. I think you maybe, everybody probably knows that. They brought them from Russia, and we raised them. We always had a field of sunflower seeds just for our own consumption, and my father would harvest them and roast them and salt them, and we had sunflower seeds all winter long, every winter. And they sat around the stove eating sunflower seeds night after night. They were very fond of playing cards. They played a lot of whist. All the relatives would get together and they'd play whist. And the kids would hang around and watch and listen. And nobody would talk. Of course, they would talk. They'd have a great time. But they did that whenever that was a social event probably one of the main social events other than dancing was getting together and playing cards.
What other things did you do for entertainment?
You mean besides work? There really wasn't a lot of time. There really, between whatever we had to do for school and the chores, when it was time to go to bed, it was pretty much over. We did have a battery-operated radio on the farm, and Sunday afternoons we would listen to Tom Mix and The Shadow and all the Sunday afternoon programs. Sundays were not bad for work. The parents did a fairly decent Sunday. There was always chores. The animals had to be fed and the cows had to be milked twice a day. But the afternoon, there were even naps. My parents would take naps on Sunday afternoons, and there'd always be a big Sunday dinner. Mother would do a lot of chicken. Chicken was a big Sunday afternoon or a Sunday dinner. We'd go to church, come home, go to church. Christmas, we'd go to midnight mass. That was in Berlin. That was a ways away. And you had to go to communion, so you couldn't eat. It was Yeah, church was a big part of their lives, I have to say.
Can you describe what your church was like when you were growing up?
Small, but pretty typical. There was an altar, booth. I mean, what do you call it? Benches, and it is pretty typical. Wait. I take that back. Not when I was growing up, but when we were in Strasbourg, we had one of the nicest churches in the state is in Strasbourg. A really ornate thing. You'll find pictures of it in the Germans from Russia collection. And that place is impressive. Even today, when you walk in there, it's one of those things that they put together to work their way to heaven. I think it's just a phenomenal church. But then in Lemoore, we had just a little church. Lemoore didn't have a lot of Catholics, which presented something of a problem socially, because I grew up in the time when Catholics did not date Lutherans and Lutherans did not date Catholics. That just didn't happen. And all of the good-looking girls in my high school, grade school, were Lutherans. Almost all. But there weren't many of us. There weren't many Catholics. But I had a lot of great friends. But my kid brother, who was born many years later, he married a Lutheran girl. So I mean, things just changed so radically in the 50s. But well, not the 50s, but the 60s and 70s. But no, you just didn't. You did not. And marrying outside the church was not a good thing. And most of that should be cut out. That was rambling nothings.
It's a good story. All right. Can you tell us about seating arrangements in the church when you were growing up?
We sat as a family. It wasn't as the Catholics weren't like some of the other church groups where the men sat on one side and the women on the other. There was segregation at mealtime, always, and that was the kids sat in another room, and the parents sat by themselves when there was company, not when just the family was at home, and the adults all got served before the kids got served. The kids got whatever was left, and the adults got served first. I think of that so often when I watch what happens now as people take care of the little kids or the kids that are sitting in the separate tables, and then they get around and taking care of the adults. It was just a different emphasis. I don't know whether it was better or worse, but the world did not revolve around the little snowflakes.
Did your church have a lot of activities outside of the Mass that you took part in?
No, not for us. The church, I'm sure in Strasbourg, they did. They had Catholic schools there, and they had Catholic ball teams, and I mean everything was Catholic. But in Lemoore County, the Catholic churches were just not big enough for that. No, except for going to the churches, everybody going to church on Sundays and all the days that we had to go to church and catechism. It wasn't that big a part of my life.
Can you tell me about ceremonies for being confirmed or First Communion?
They were a very important event. I know it was built up quite. I couldn't wait to do it. You know, it's one of those things that you're indoctrinated to the point where this is going to be the greatest thing that ever happened, And it was a big event, and there was preparation for it. You had to pass tests, and I don't know of anybody who ever flunked one, but you had to pass them. And there was a special ceremony at Mass for the First Communion people, and you were made to feel very important. And there's a picture I showed you of that was taken with the priest out in front of the church, and when there weren't a lot of events that involved making you feel like an important person, they stood out that way. But otherwise, I think I know what they're like now, and they're not a whole lot different now. They're much the same wherever. I know our neighbors had First Communion last Sunday, and they made a big thing out of it for their little girl, and it's still the same.
Did you have big family celebrations afterwards?
Well, nothing that I can. I suppose had we stayed in the Germans from Russia community, we would have. But when there just weren't that many of us in Lemoore County in our respective classes, so it was we just go home and celebrate as a family. But I can imagine what it's like when there's First Communion in Strasbourg, then and now probably. But I know then it would have been a major event.
Right. Were all the services in English?
Well, no. Those were the days of Latin. There was just the sermon was English, everything else was Latin. So it was zoned out.
I was going to ask if you understood very much of it then.
It's just you go and you don't really listen. You probably don't anyway. I think if it were English, it'd be pretty much the same. But it's just put in your time, meet your obligation, because it's a mortal sin not to go to Mass on Sunday, and that was pretty much it.
Did your family go to confession?
Oh yeah, yeah. Confession was, and in those days you could not have communion unless you were what was called in a state of grace. And so confession was Saturday night, and Sunday was communion. And there were so many sins I decided when I was about 7 that I could never be in a state of grace on Sunday morning, because I must have done something bad between Saturday night and Sunday morning, and felt guilty as can be. Because you've got to be in a state of grace, and you can't chew the bread, the host, and one got stuck at the roof of my mouth one time, and I couldn't release it, and I rolled it, and I maybe even chewed it a little bit by the time I got it down, and I was sure I was going to hell.
Were you allowed to ask questions about your faith?
Oh yeah. Now, that doesn't mean I got an answer. Well, I don't think, in all seriousness, that my parents really knew that much about the root. It was just what they were taught, and this is what the priest said, and if this is what the Pope said, and if that's the word. And I don't know if that's changed a lot. I really doubt it has. I mean, a few things have, but the Pope is still telling the world what to do and what not to do, and Americans don't listen.
Were there any special rules that your family had, or were there any restrictions on your family because of your faith?
Well, you don't eat meat on Friday, and we didn't eat meat on Friday. No, it was pretty much, well, the thing about it is it's a Christian faith and the Christian rules apply, and they were pretty much followed. My parents were fairly morally upright people. They did what they were supposed to do and tried to teach us to do the same, I think. It mostly stuck.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about church when you were growing up?
Well, church is kind of, I don't have a lot of good memories about it. I suspect strongly that if we'd have stayed in the Strasbourg area, it would have been a more important part of my growing up. As it is, it really wasn't. It was secondary. In fact, I think it was fairly hard on my parents because they tried to continue what they were doing in their original community, and it just was very difficult. The church in Lemoore had no resident priest, for example. The priest came from Verona, 10 miles away, after giving a sermon and having a service in Verona. And he would set records for having us meet our obligations. It was not unusual to have a 15, 20-minute service and we were done, which is not bad, if you weren't that eager to go in the first place. Oh, and I do remember this, the Easter time, the holy days of the week, Easter week. There was Mass every morning, and my parents insisted that we went to Mass, and that meant coming into class late, and that was not something I enjoyed doing. But it was, and for one, you come in with all the other Catholics, and there weren't many of us, and it'd stand out in a way that kids don't like to stand out. So again, the church was not real big in my growing up life. In fact, it was a nuisance.
All right. Well, you've mentioned quite a few holidays in passing. Let's talk about them in a little more detail. What was your favorite holiday when you were growing up?
Oh, probably Easter. I think maybe with a celebration. Christmas was okay, but it didn't mean gifts. We just didn't have the money for it. But we had there'd be major meals. Other times too. We had, with no electricity, we had no lights to decorate trees. But what my mother would do, we'd always have a tree. She would string popcorn, and we had candles on candlesticks that were on these trees. Think about this, and they'd light them. Yeah, and the house didn't burn down, but it's what a hazard when you think about it. But she made all the decorations. I don't know whether we had any store-bought ones at all. And they'd always try to come up with something for us in the way of a gift, but it was never major, never anything that, mostly clothes that we needed anyway. But if they'd have had it, they would have. They just didn't have it.
You mentioned going to midnight mass
Mm-hmm.
for Christmas. Were there any Christmas programs through the church that you participated in?
Nothing significant. If I'm sure I would have avoided anything I could, and but I don't know that there was that much. We had a lot of school programs, in the high school and grade school, and those are the things I did.
Can you tell me about school programs for Christmas?
Oh, for Christmas? Oh, I don't think we had a lot specifically Christmas. There might have been some group singing for something or another, but that never included me because I can't sing. Couldn't then and I can't now.
Okay.
Although I did sing in a musical in college. I still can't believe that I did. But
What musical?
Finian's Rainbow. I played Og.
You mentioned one of your earliest memories was your cousin playing Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Was Santa Claus always a part of your Christmas celebration?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The idea of Santa Claus, sure. Yeah, but I don't know that there were that many Santa Clauses, and maybe had there been, I probably wouldn't have been so frightened. But this was Strasbourg, so I was very young. But, I couldn't have been more than 3 or something, two to three in that range. But I can still see him at the door, and just scared me to the bedroom. The folks' bedroom was a room right off the living room with a curtain for a door, a double door, and it had a curtain on it. And I plowed through the curtains and went under the bed.
Is there anything else about Christmas you'd like to share with us?
Not particularly. Just it was most of it is. I think Christmas is like nothing unique to Germans from Russia or my specific background. Any number of people would have had the similar kind of experience, I'm sure.
And then can you tell me about Easter? What was so special?
What was so special about Easter? I don't know that it was so. To call it special might not be memorable. It was a very serious time. 3 o'clock on Friday. Things nobody talked, and there were rituals that we went through, and there was a lot of praying going on, and then Sunday, the happiness of Easter Sunday, and the dinners and everything afterwards. It was just a very sad time followed by a very happy time, and then it was played out right all the way. But I did not enjoy the hours of praying, which I got to do. And that was, by the way, was my mother's favorite form of punishment. I would get to kneel in a corner saying a rosary, which always, in retrospect, strikes me as kind of odd to make that a punishment. But it worked. But then, of course, I was such a good boy, so I didn't have to do it often. Sure.
Were there any special foods that your mother made for Easter?
Just an Easter. It was in the spring, and just a nice Easter dinner. Probably fresh chicken. We had a lot of chicken because we could butcher them on the spot. It's not like pork or beef, which was just done every once in a while.
Did you do Easter eggs or anything?
Yeah, always Easter eggs. Yeah, we had lots of eggs because we raised chicken, and Mother always dyed eggs for us and hid them. That was something we did for sure. And she made candy and things for us, and probably bought some too. But yeah, it was fun.
Do you remember what she used to dye the eggs?
I think dye. I think commercial dye. No. Paper. Those strings of paper that are different colors.
Crepe paper?
Crepe paper. She used crepe paper a lot, as I recall. But she used commercial dye too. But crepe paper was cheap. Worked.
Okay. Did you have Easter baskets that you had to hide or
I-
find?
Yeah, we got to do that. Yeah, but you know, it's a blur. I don't remember things specifically, but I'm sure that there are. Those things all sound like we did them.
All right. Did you celebrate any of the non-religious holidays like Valentine's Day?
Oh yeah, yeah, because they were a part of the community network. Anything that the community did, we did. And I mean, we were not at all non-social. Parents had a lot of friends, and I had a lot of friends, and we just grew up like most people do in small towns. Community affairs, and roller skating. Yeah.
What other things did you do?
Did I do?
Like roller skating.
Oh, I ice skated. We didn't have hockey teams, but we always had a skating rink, and this is after we moved to town. On the farm, we didn't have a bicycle. The only time I rode a bicycle was when we went to Berlin, and I rode my cousins. So it was after we moved to town. We did all the things that you do. Went dancing quite early, and my mother was quite insistent that I learn to dance before I wanted to learn to dance. So she had me dancing, and had my older sister teaching me by 7th grade, 6th grade, 5th grade, you know, whenever. And it was nice in later years to be able to dance. But that was something that Germans from Russia boys could do. If they weren't a man if they couldn't dance. My father was an excellent dancer. He just was so smooth.
Can you please tell me about your father?
Oh, my father. He was the second oldest in his family. He has had very little education. He just started working at a very early age, I suppose, as early as you can start working. He would go to school for maybe a month or two a year for, I think, only 3 or 4 years that he went to school at all. And a very strong young man. He was, and very athletic, could pretty much do anything physically that could be done. He started working as a farmhand at age 12. His father would hire him out to other farmers, and he had to help support the family. And he got paid nothing for his efforts. He mentioned a number of times that the only thing he ever got paid was some Bull Durham that the farmer would buy for him on Saturdays, which for a 12-year-old is probably not real good payment for anything. But he was a very good dancer. He was very strong. They had, when I remember so often my uncles talking about some of the things that he would do. He was the fastest kid at the county fair, always win all the races, and he had lightning fast fists, they would tell me. They were fond of telling about the time that he was at a dance, and he walked out of the dance hall, and some group of young men mistook him for somebody else and started to beat him up. And he stood against a car and knocked out 5 people. He had a real long arm span. He was my height, but he had about a 6'4" arm span, and very strong, very impossible to hold down. They would say you could not pin him if in a wrestling match. I often think of what great time he'd have had in high school, or in college, because he was really a tremendous athlete. And he could dance in a way that the women would say that they didn't need to do anything, because he just walked them around, and his feet never got more than that high from the floor when he was dancing. So very coordinated. Nice man. He did not lay a hand on me. Just hard-working, just worked all the time, just never ever didn't work. But intelligent. I'd have to say he's uneducated but very intelligent man who learned the grocery business on his own and did very well at it. And then when he retired from that, he couldn't stay retired, so he bought a bowling alley and learned the bowling business. And when he retired from that, he couldn't stay retired, so he bought another grocery store. And I heard about it and unbought it for him, because he was retirement age. He had no business going back into business, but that's the kind of man he was. He just worked and worked, and without not working, he didn't know what to do with himself. But that's my father.
And what was his name?
Gabe. No middle name. That's where I got mine.
Do you know when and where he was born?
He was born in Rugby, September 29th, 1912.
How did he display his emotions?
Oh, he was sentimental. I mean, he would tear up pretty easily, but he didn't show anger that I can recall, and he had many reasons to do so. His whole family, quite frankly, were all very, very pleasant people. They always smiling and congenial.
Can you describe your relationship with your father?
Oh, we worked together, and we didn't talk a lot. There wasn't a lot to say. We just talked work. Yeah, I worked next to him from the time I was a little boy until I stopped going home when I was in college. I can't remember a time that he was unkind to me or unpleasant. He would give me directions, but it was never harsh. He never raised his voice. Now my mother, she was the disciplinarian. She thought she would raise her voice.
Can you tell me about your mother?
My mother was a very nice person. She wanted more out of life, I think, than life gave her. In all frankness, but she was a very dedicated mother. She would have done anything for her kids, I'm sure. She died very early. She was only 50. She had died of a blood clot after an ulcerated colitis. But I don't think she was a real happy woman. But I don't know how this translates into history, but that's my honest reaction to her. She was a good mother, excellent cook, which always helps, and a faithful wife, which always helps. Good, hard-working companion. But she would much rather have lived someplace other than on a dirt farm and done the things she had to do. Much better when we got to the town, I think. She had the water that she washed the clothes in was soft enough that it didn't crystallize as she was washing the clothes.
That helps.
Mm-hmm.
How did she express her emotions?
Oh, she didn't hesitate to yell a little and show her frustration. Just the opposite of my father. But it's not unusual. No.
And can you describe your relationship with her?
Oh, I was the only boy, and I think my sisters will tell you to a person that I was her favorite child. My relationship was probably, it was outstanding. I know she was very fond of me, and I of her. She was a good woman, good mother. Notwithstanding what I said about her yelling, she rarely yelled at me, but she yelled a lot.
All right. So, which parent would you say influenced your life more?
Well, probably my father, and his the quiet strength way.
Okay. How many children did your parents have?
Total of 6, divided into 2 families, really. There were 4 of us born within, I don't know, my older sister's 3 years older than I am. My youngest, 3 years younger, so a span of 6 or 7 years. And then many years later, they had 2 more. But they're a separate family. In the way that I think of as a family, because they were the 4 of us who grew up together, and then the 2 who came later.
Okay. Did the 4 of you and later the 6 of you ever get in trouble?
Now, you wouldn't want me to go on record telling you that, would you?
Okay.
None of us did time.
Well, I was just wondering, other than having to say the rosary, what were some of your other punishments when you got into mischief?
Well, we really didn't get into that kind of mischief. Whatever we did, we got away with.
And was it easier to get away with things if your father was around than if your mother was around?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, because they were both around, in the sense we just didn't do anything that kids don't do. I'm being a little facetious here.
Okay.
We probably did some of the same things that everybody else does, and only tended to get away with them better than some of the kids do.
All right. Do you know how your parents met?
I would assume at a dance, that because I'm just making that assumption. It had to have been.
Okay. Were your parents were fairly religious people,
Mm-hmm.
correct? Mm-hmm. Did they when you were growing up?
No, one of the things that I think history will tell us is the Germans from Russia avoided politics to their detriment. They were so suspicious of government after what the Russians did to them that they really just stayed to themselves. And I remember many discussions about how bad the government was. When the parents would get together and the people would play cards, although I doubt that's much different than any other group of people, but they did not run for office. They just avoided anything that had to do with politics, which is really strange, and education as well. They shunned education. And then the next generation, my generation, it was just the opposite. We were encouraged, at least up through high school, whereas they were discouraged. I think there are more of my generation with 3 degrees than there were my dad's generation with 3rd grade educations. But politics, no.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your parents?
I can't think of anything that's really so unique that we haven't covered. They're...
All right. Then, can you please tell me a little bit about your siblings? Maybe we can start with, you tell me their names in birth order.
Okay. Oldest is Dorothy.
Okay.
She's lives in a farm near Condi, South Dakota. Has a place in Arizona. She dropped out of high school. I can mention that as a sophomore. Got married very young. She was 16, and raised 4 really nice, intelligent kids. But that's pretty much, other than that, it's typical. I'm the second oldest. And then my sister Margie, she's a year and 3 months younger than I am. And she became a grade school teacher, taught school in the St. Louis area, St. Louis, Missouri area for probably 40 years, just retired not long ago. Then there's my sister Bev, who got a 2-year degree and taught grade school for a while, got married and raised 3 children, and then died of a brain problem, an operation that went wrong at age 50. Then there's my sister Carol. She's part of the second family. She has an MBA and was a regional executive for the U.S. Post Office Department. And retired just a couple of years ago. And then there's my brother Gary, who was born in '53. He's the youngest, and he graduated from UND. He's a buyer for the John Deere manufacturing plant in Valley City. So that's all of them.
Can you tell me about what they were like when you were growing up? Any of them?
Well, the 2 young ones were really just kind of like little kids that were fun to be around. I just never really did very much with them. That I was gone for most of the time. That Gary was growing up, and Carol as well. So they were just nice little kids. Whereas I was very close to the other three, especially Margie, the one that was just a year, 3 months younger than I was. She's the one that, if I ever got into any trouble, it would have been with her. This was when we were in high school. We would always time it so that we could go to mass at a time that my father didn't go, and then we'd go fishing or something. That was a naughty thing we did. I don't know whether they ever found out about that or knew about it or not, but that's what she and I did. She has a rather interesting medical history. She was born with a birth defect that left her with a growth that started at the top of her head and ran all the way down to her collarbone, included her ear, and she always had a lot of trouble with her ear. It ran all the time, but the growth got worse, and in 1948, it appeared to be cancerous. Or in any event, she went to Rochester, Minnesota, and it was removed, and it was such a unique case that she ended up being one of those Rochester cases that they used to highlight when they did the history of Mayo, and the growth they removed from her was in a specimen jar that you could visit if you wanted to. But it was one of the early miracle operations that without a doubt, without it, she wouldn't have made it even a few more years. And she was left with a massive scar, but other than that, she's fully recovered from it. So when you go to Mayo Clinic now, you can't find that anymore. They removed that display they used to have. I saw it in my years ago, where part of Margie was in a jar.
Did she go to a doctor very often for that when she was young?
No. Now, she'd get earaches, but mother would take care of them with home remedies. Her right ear would really hurt a lot. But if you named the home remedy, my mother probably tried it.
Do you remember any of her home remedies?
Yeah. One was smoke. My folks didn't smoke, but they would take a cigarette and inhale it and blow smoke into it. I don't know whether the smoke did any good or the warm air, but that was one. And just hot patches and things like that. The smoke thing I remember the best.
Did she have remedies for other kinds of illnesses? Or?
She probably had something for everything, but we didn't get sick that often, which is, I think, when you're not around a lot of other kids, you probably don't get sick as much. We all had our chicken pox, we all had measles, we got all of those things, but as a group, we were very healthy.
Right. What else do you remember about your siblings when you were growing
up? I can't think of anything that's significant.
Well, what was it like when there was a new baby in the family?
Well, first, my mother was not happy about it. She thought she'd raised her, had all the children she was going to have, and so at first she was rather unhappy that she was a mother again. But then the kids were so lovable, and they were just like little dolls. And she also had a lot of help. My sisters were older, and so it was different. It really did change the complexion of the family when those young kids came along. But it only takes a while for any family to adjust to an event like that, and adjust, I think everybody did.
Right. Did you all get along fairly well?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, see the thing about memory, you know this about memory, don't you? You only remember something from the last time you recalled it. So every time you recall something, you remember it from the next time you remember it, it's from that time. Well, there's something about 50, 60 years that just kind of erases any bad memories.
All right. One last question about your siblings. Did any of you have nicknames?
Well, yeah, I did. That my family didn't call me this, but the community did. I was Little Gabe to a lot of people. But that's the only I can't think of. And then it became Gabe. But I don't remember anybody else having one. Just
How did you get that nickname?
just because I worked with Dad, and I think the businessmen like maybe one of the Marts, the lumber yard couldn't remember my name, and they'd call me Little Gabe, and then it became Gabe. But my friends called me Gabe too often.
All right. Well then, let's move on a little bit. Is there anything else you'd like to add about your family?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a few questions about when you went to school. So, can you describe the building where you first started school?
Well, my first memory of school was before I really started. It was when I visited this country school where my sister went in Ammons County back before we moved to Lemoore. And what I remember about that is just being around these older kids and trying to learn English, working very hard at getting some English. I probably was 4, maybe 5, and the teacher, my sister's teacher, kind of liked me, and so she would ask if it was all right for me to come to school, and I would sit on her lap while she was teaching the rest of the kids, and she would, when they were busy, she'd read to me and teach me. So I had a little bit of a tutoring there, but the older kids were just wonderful about just being nice to little kids. I remember the word fence. When I learned the word fence, I couldn't believe that the word fence in German was the same as the word fence was in English. Well, the fact is that most of the German words that I knew were English, especially anything having to do with technology, anything from 1900 on. These were all words that my parents used that weren't really German, they were really English. But that was my first school. My second school was Badger number 1 in Lemoore. That's where I did first grade, and that's where I really learned to speak English. And there were 16 kids in the school. There are 8 grades. My grade had 2 kids in it, which means I had at least the average number. Most had some kids. One of my best friends was an 8th grader, a guy. We had muskrats in a slough right next to, it was on our farm, and he would come to our farm and trap muskrats and stay overnight with me. Just a great guy. I was really sad when he moved, which was, I think I was about the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and he moved. But it was, a central coal stove that the teacher had to keep fired. Teachers were 2-year standards. We all had that minimum education. Good teachers, as I recall anyway. They seemed good to me. They had the materials they had to go through, and we had the standardized tests that had to be passed, and we seemed to make it. And,
were they usually female teachers?
always females. I did not have a male teacher till I got to high school, well, junior high.
What subjects did they teach you?
All of them. The reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography.
Was it a one-room school
One room.
building?
Mm-hmm. There were a place for the coats, kind of a little entry. There was a chemical toilet. No, it wasn't a chemical. It was a toilet of some kind, obviously. And it smelled of apples and stale bread.
What did you bring for lunch when you went to school?
We brought sandwiches usually, sandwiches with bread that my mother baked, good home-baked, wonderful bread. And I always envied the kids who brought their store-bought Wonder Bread because it was so soft and almost candy-like. And we had this hard bread that was just good for you. I didn't know it at the time. I don't think anybody cared whether something was good or bad. It was just that Mother was not about to buy bread when she could bake it.
In your school, was there any tension between children of different ethnic backgrounds?
We had no different ethnic backgrounds. I would not have. I'm trying to remember the first time that I had any contact with anyone other than Caucasians. I think probably in high school, but not in any of my classes. I would never. It was just such a segregated community.
Were there any tensions between people of different religious denominations?
Not really, just subtle things like dating. It was pretty hard to think about a serious relationship with between kids of different religions. That was a different world. But all my friends, I don't think I had a Catholic friend. Boyfriend. There weren't many of us, for one. If you were restricted to having Catholic friends, you just weren't going to have any friends. But all my good friends were something else. But a very tolerant community. There just wasn't any of that.
Right. Did you have a lot of homework?
I had no homework. No, I did not take work home. There wasn't really much time to do work at home. There was always something that had to be done, and which is really too bad. I'm sure there was work I could have been doing and should have been doing, but we had study halls but quite frankly, it wasn't that hard. School wasn't that hard.
Okay. Did you ever celebrate holidays at school?
Just the usual. The Valentine's Day, you exchanged Valentines, and but nothing.
Were you required to bring a Valentine for everybody?
Let's see. Are we going back to the country school? I suspect so. Yeah. I don't remember it specifically, but I think we did. And we made them. These weren't store-bought mostly. I think. Again, I'm throwing together a lot of years, and some years they probably were bought.
Okay. You said you went to the Lemoore School until about 4th grade?
That's the country school, Badger number 1 in Lemoore County, south of Berlin, 2.5 miles from the farm. And that was the 4th grade, through the 4th grade. The 5th grade I was in Lemoore, the city of Lemoore. Yeah, that's when the folks moved to town.
Okay. And was there a big change from the country school to the Lemoore School?
Oh yeah, it was a major change. It was like going to another country, almost. But you know, when you're that age, you adapt very quickly, and it wasn't hard to get to know people. They were all, you know, they're friendly and accepting, and that was not a real problem. I made some good friends, and they're still friends. It was harder for my sister, Dorothy. She was an honor student out in the country, and probably too mature for her age group. When she came to Lemoore, she just expected to have a much more almost semi-adult environment, and of course she didn't. She had typical kids who've always had other kids around them. She didn't have that many young kids, except for, well, I don't know how many kids at that grade school out in the country were even close to her age. So she was more a young lady than she was a young girl. So high school, school was very hard for her. I mean, socially, she just couldn't handle it.
Okay. How important was getting an education to your family?
Getting an education was very important up through high school. I think the concept of college probably was beyond the expectations I know it was of my parents. I think I'm the first person in my father's side of the family who went to high school, finished high school. No, that's wrong. Finished college. I had some aunts that finished high school. But it was very important to me, and not so much because of my parents, but the peer influence. My best friends as I was growing up in Lemoore were the Kessels, and well, you probably know the name. He was the state's attorney, the father, the lawyer, and he had a daughter in my class, and a son in the next class, and then another son. And I lived with them almost. I mean, I spent more time with them socially than I did with my own family. And I'd go water skiing with them. I learned to water ski on their lake, and for them, going to college was not an option. It was just always, well, we're going to go to college, and their parents went to UND, so they were heading for UND from the time we were in the 6th grade on up, and they'd asked me where I was going to college, not whether I was. So I was going and did. But I think my parents were very proud of the fact that I did, except one instance. I graduated from college and I was teaching high school and applied to law school and went to law school. And my mother heard that I had quit teaching high school and I was going to school again, and she was really, really depressed about it. here's this high school teacher. My son is a high school teacher and he's quitting it. Of course, when I graduated from law school, she was as proud as could be. But so it was important that we got a basic education. They realized how important that was. But I think beyond that was not something they'd expected.
Was it a major transition from grade school to high school for you?
No, because the transition for me was from country grade school to town grade school, and that took place in the 5th grade. By the time I got into the grades, by the time I was in the 6th and 7th grade, I was just another Lemoore grade school kid. There was no difference, except I was shorter. Well, my mother was so eager to get me to school that I started school at age 5. And so I was always either the youngest kid in my class or second youngest. And I'm short now, but I was even shorter then. And that's kind of hard to be a short boy in athletics.
Can you tell me about your high school experiences?
Well, I had to work a lot. I would often go home at lunch, run home at lunch, and run the store so my father could have lunch. But otherwise, I really wasn't a great athlete in high school. In fact, I wasn't even a good athlete. I was too short and for most things. But I was a good student, and I had a great time. I had good friends, and I was one of the student managers of the football and basketball teams, so I got to do all of the sports things that people do. And I was in the class plays, a couple of them, and things like that.
Do you remember the plays?
No. I know one of them I had to have my face painted black. Yeah, I don't remember what that was anymore, but it was. And I remember that in part because I've seen a picture. Other than that, it's pretty much history.
Did you take different kinds of classes when you got to high school?
Well, we didn't have different kinds of classes to take. There was a curriculum. I think the only areas where there was a difference was probably in the math, where you had a general math class or algebra. And of course I took algebra. But beyond that, there weren't a lot of electives. You pretty much took what they had. And that was pretty standard, I think. That was a little bit of a problem. There weren't any higher math classes. And I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and I didn't realize how much math I didn't have till I got to college and was competing with the students from Fargo and Jamestown and their calculus. And so but I think it was a good, solid, general education that I didn't take full advantage of. But I think that's pretty typical.
What was the attendance like in high school? Did a lot of people still have to miss to work?
No. I don't. Most of the kids didn't work, and I didn't miss any school to work. It's just after school and Saturdays and Sundays and times like that. But I got to go to basketball games and football games, and it wasn't. We're not talking about all work. I had a lot of fun too.
Well, what was your favorite high school memory?
Oh my. A favorite high school memory. You know, I'm stumped. I think making the honor roll the first time, you know, which happened in the 7th grade, which was the first time I could make it. But no, I, I, I don't have anything that stands out in high school.
Is there anything else about your grade school and high school years you'd like to share with us?
You know, after we moved to Lemoore, there really isn't anything unique about what I went through. I do know that after we moved to Lemoore, I got to take my horse with me to Lemoore. I couldn't stand apart with my horse, so we took my horse and had this little shed, and that lasted a year, having to feed the water the horse. And you know, like in the farm, we just put her out to pasture with the bull, and that's where she spent the winter. But in Lemoore, she needed care every day, so that was after that, it was pretty much typical of any of the rest of the kids. Before that, you know, the farm was different. The farm was very unique, and a lot of it was really Germans from Russia. But after Lemoore, it was really a way different environment.
Okay. Well then, you mentioned briefly earlier a little bit about World War II. Can you tell me what you remember? I realize you were young.
Oh boy. I just remember a lot of sadness. You know, the adults, they just talked about it. I had uncles who were in harm's way, and cousins, and not cousins, but my parents' cousins, and so they were constantly concerned about them. We were sort of isolated because of where we lived, so there was less, and we did go to movies, and this was late in the war. They'd have the newsreels of things, but mostly it was just the fear. There was just a malaise that the whole country felt, and of the rationing that everybody had to do, and constantly worried about whether we were going to survive the thing. It was a very, very difficult time. And then, of course, again, my uncles, when they're out there getting shot at. And one of my uncles was a medic, and he was involved in 3 major European invasions, and came out of it pretty much an emotional basket case. But he recovered from that eventually. But then I just remember the happiness, the euphoria of because at that point I'm older enough that you know I can share in it, but it was just, and then the optimism that followed it, and there was all of the people came home, and you know, it was just an exciting time, and the country started really undoing what was done. Cars were being manufactured again, and I showed you a picture of the 47 Ford. Well, Ford stopped manufacturing cars, I think 1940. I could be wrong. So the 1947 was really the sheet metal from the 1940 vehicle. So that whole period of 7 years, there weren't any cars. Everything was devoted to the war effort. And so people were buying new cars, and they could afford them because times got really good. They went from really bad to really good, and people had jobs, and and went really well until '48 when Korea started, which it's still, my memory of that, it seemed like we had no break from wars. And then we really didn't, because after that, I sweated worrying about being drafted. I went through I wasn't going to volunteer, but if I got drafted, I was going to go. I was too young for Korea, but I was ripe for Nam, and we had a thing called the student deferment in those days, and I took it, and it meant keeping your grades up. And but my best friend, for all practical purposes, lost his life in Nam, but a lot of friends did. He didn't lose it there. He lost it when he got home and drank himself to death. But that's what I remember. I remember a lot of war, and there have been a lot of times in my life where there hasn't been. And when we weren't at war, we had the Cold War, and we were building bomb shelters, and probably will again.
Do you remember things like rationing?
Oh, very well. I remember the tokens and sugar, especially sugar products, and for somebody like Mother who liked to bake a lot, that was a problem. For some reason, we were able to get more syrup, but gasoline was rationed. Everything was rationed. You couldn't get rubber. Tires were just, everybody was having flat tires and blown out tires all the time because there just wasn't any rubber. Farm machinery wouldn't work very well because there wasn't rubber. And everything was in short supply. Machinery, they just didn't manufacture anything. And if there was a plant, it was producing tanks and jeeps and whatever was needed for the war effort. It was all out. Yeah, but we were probably better off than a lot of people because we lived on the farm and raised our own food. It was just the things that went like sugar, and that caused a problem.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share about all those wars?
No. I think most of what I know about the war is pretty general information that most people have.
All right. What was your most stressful childhood memory?
I'm not certain that I can think of an event. I think probably the idea of World War II, that hung over our lives on a daily basis, and was quite frightening to young kids, I think. And the worry that the parents had about relatives in harm's way, and that always, when parents are worried, then you're worried, and that was always there. But pets dying and that sort of thing, those are all things that just happen.
Did you always have a lot of pets?
We always had animals. We always had a dog. The dog always lived outside. There's no way my mother would have let a dog in the house. But we always had orphan animals, little sheep that mothers wouldn't feed or would die, and little pigs, and they were always born in the winter, of course, late early spring, and they would live in the porch area of the house, and we would bottle feed them, and they became pets. They would follow you around the yard, and it was just great fun to have them. But little sheep especially would become such nice little pets. But that was it. There wasn't any. We always had cats, but they were outside too. They were in the barn. Mother just did not live with animals. It was just the way it was. But we had I remember one time the cat population got away from us, and the barn was full of cats. They were there one day, and then they were gone. And that's something, how when there get to be too many of them, they depopulate. I have no idea what happened to them, but I can surmise. It got to be a disaster area. We milked by hand, and we separated the cream from the milk by hand, and then the cream was delivered to the creamery on town days. So the cats were always around the milk area and begging and looking for milk. But we all got to turn the handle on the cream separator, which is a real chore, and clean up the equipment afterwards for 20 to 23 cows.
Did you make butter as well?
Yes. The cream or the milk would be allowed to sit, and the cream would come to the surface, and that's the cream that Mother cooked with, and the cream she used to make butter. Yeah. You had the butter thingy that you just turned, and whenever she could, Dad to do it, because he could just spin that thing in no time at all. He had butter, but we all got to churn it. Good butter, I think. It seemed good at the time. So she had all of those things to work with. She always had flour. And was a great cook. So we ate well. We maybe didn't have any money, but we ate well.
Okay. What is your happiest childhood memory?
Probably the day my pony was born. That'd be one I can come up with. I had a lot of happy childhood memories. It was, and they're getting better all the time. I hardly have any bad ones anymore. I've pretty much forgotten them all. But it was, I think, mostly spending time around animals and working with them, and the peace and quiet of the barn. There's just to have some time away from responsibilities, maybe spending a little time in the hay loft just thinking. Those were good times, but mostly everything was pretty good, I think.
Can you tell me about this pony?
This pony was an accident. My father had horses, and this is when we first moved to the Lemoore area. And a neighbor stallion, jumped the fence and impregnated one of the mares. And the little colt became my pony. It was really strange because the stallion was a large animal, the mare was a large animal, but the offspring was just a little horse, just a pony size, which is, I suppose, one of the reasons it became my horse, because it wasn't going to be a workhorse. And I had her for a lot of years. She was always there. And I rode her bareback. We didn't have a saddle, and she and I rode a lot.
Do you remember what her name was?
No, I don't, which is really odd, isn't it? But I do remember talking about happy times. It was the spring when I could bring her in out of the pasture, and start riding her. That was very, very exciting. And she was always a little bit unhappy about it at first, but then she got all right. You know, it was that was a real. I had a good time with the horse, with my little pony all those years.
What was the most adventurous thing you did as a child?
So how old are we talking about?
Up to 18.
Oh, how about 12? I liked water a lot. I couldn't swim, and we moved to town. There was a swimming area in the river, and I went swimming. This one really early in the spring, and I couldn't swim, and there was a swift current, and I got, is this adventure or is this stupid? But I almost drowned. Yeah, that time. Remember, this is the same guy who became the lifeguard on that same stretch of river, not many years later.
Yeah. How did you get out?
With a lot of luck. And knowing the river bottom like I got to know it, I was within feet of a drop-off when I hit bottom and was able to. See, the James River had a really strong current in the spring in those days. The dams just didn't exist to hold back the water like they did later. And it was a good current, and I was there with some of my buddies, and it was a challenge of some kind, and I almost lost the challenge. So that was, and I fell through the ice in December one time, and below the dam, and my good friend Lee Kessel, a good Boy Scout that he is, figured out a way to help get me free. It was middle of December. I think it was Christmas vacation, and we were down by the dam, and the water flowed all winter, so it wasn't real thick, and I had parka on. It was cold, and I went through the ice, and I tried to get back out, and I kept breaking more ice. Now this is high school, or ninth grade, something in there. And he got on his stomach the way a good Boy Scout does, and came out to help me. And then we had to walk about a half a mile to the nearest farmyard, and I had a lot of clothes on, so I wasn't freezing, but my clothes were frozen to me. They just crackled as I walked. But it wouldn't have been for my good friend and a little luck, I would have been swept under the ice, and I'd probably be in, the James River flows in the Missouri River, the Missouri flows in the Mississippi, be in the Gulf of Mexico probably. So I dove off the railroad bridge and hit a submerged boat. Darn near broke my neck. Is that adventuresome or is that stupid? You want stupid? I had a friend named Jim Audlin. He and I shot at each other with BB guns in his basement, and I still have both eyes. But I do have a scar from where we were playing hide and seek in the same basement, and I got under the bed, and he knew where I was, and he jumped on the bed, and the spring came down and almost broke my head. Is this good stuff for you? Is that good stuff?
This is good.
Yeah. Well, okay. I built a go-kart out of a Briggs & Stratton engine when I was about the 6th grade. And it would go. It went really fast. And I went out on the highway with it, and I went wide open, and I flipped it. And I have a scar right here from where I skidded on the pavement at probably 25 miles an hour. So it was made out of an old wagon, the kind that you pull, and I just put the Briggs & Stratton motor on the back and a put a pulley on one of the wheels and then opened it up. And so, you know, it's only this wide. There's no, and the center of gravity is going to be where you are, which is up here. It wasn't very smart. Did I? Yeah. See, the thing is, nature is really, really weird about letting some people survive when others aren't as lucky.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your childhood?
I don't think so. I think we've gotten so far astray that it's getting...
All right. Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Oh, I don't know that it's important to tell my life story. I think it is important that generations pass on whatever they can. I know that in retrospect, I just regret not pumping my grandparents and some of my older relatives, because there are things I'd like to know now. Like I'd like to know more about my grandfather Kraft and the events surrounding his time in Russia. And I know I could have found those things out had he done what I just did, he'd have something really solid to contribute. You know, mine's mostly just another also ran life of almost any North Dakotan. But that's the reason I don't know that if you hadn't asked me to, I would have thought it was that important. But I'm happy to do it. If I've made any contribution, it's worth the time. And you're a very pleasant person, so that makes it even more.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to share with us? Other observations?
Well, just that I think what you're doing is very important. The Germans from Russia Heritage Society and I go back. I'm one of the charter members, charter member 96, as a matter of fact, which is a story. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
I'm at the law school. I'm teaching in my office, and the secretary buzzes, and she says, "Ray Friedrich is on the phone." And I'm thinking, Ray Friedrich, do I know? Well, that must be Judge Ray Friedrich. So I pick up the phone and say, "Hello, Judge, how are you?" And he says, "Larry, you're a chairman from Russia, aren't you?" That's the way. "Yeah, send me $2. "Judge, I'd be happy to send you $2. Why do you want $2? "Well, we're starting this little organization of Germans from Russia, and we want to put out a little newsletter, and we need some money." So that's how I became charter member number 96 of the Germans from Russia Heritage Society, which has gone on to do great things, and they've got quite a in fact, I donated my collection of old newsletters to the association. They're up at I had them from the beginning until I donated them. Yeah, Judge Friedrich, what a guy.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, my pleasure.